Okay, sorry about that interruption, folks. Little glitch in the software. Anyways, so where I left off, if we were able to use much more efficient equipment, what we're going to see is what this animation will show, which is a reduction in demand. We're going to go from that value to that value. Now, it's going to be up to the economics at the time to whether decide to make that up by buying less power or running peaker plants less. They're not going to gain anything special by using these peaker plants less because that capital construction cost has already been done. However, what that is going to mean is that as consumers become more power hungry, and as they are more, and as more people begin to use more power, those peaker plants, they will be able to stretch out that investment longer and will not be required to build new generation, new expensive generation plants for a longer period of time. Anyway, so that's the basis behind that curve. Now we're going to go ahead and or I should say, let's back up and close that loop. So this is why utility companies want you to use that energy efficient equipment. And this makes a lot more sense to me now that I'm doing this, or now that I've done this research, is it demonstrates that those peaker plants, as they are able to use those more effectively in the long term, that is going to pay off immensely in future profits. Now this solar curve, we really didn't touch much on that, and that is an important part of this discussion. Now there's a whole other ethics issue associated with solar that I'm not going to delve into. I'm going to try and keep it within the scope of utility incentives. So what I did was I basically took this curve right here, and I guess I'll move on to my next slide here. Basically what this does is this is a little chart that I did. Doing the math on my own time was basically demonstrated that how much more expensive the peaker plants were, and you can see in this particular chart, based on those figures, it was more than double the cost. So it's 100 in the realm of 150% more expensive. Anyways, so as we move on to solar and how solar impacts the demand curve, it's interesting how solar panels in the beginning, everybody was incentivizing, utility companies included, because the idea was that this solar power is going to be able to lessen that demand curve, and they would give anything to bring that curve down and stabilize their demand over time. And solar was looking to be a great way to do it. However, as solar began to grow, we realized something really interesting. You can see this is the curve, and I'll go ahead and go back to my previous presentation, because what we see here is that solar is extremely effective from here to here, and you can see that is midday, which is what we would expect and what we would think to be good, but in actuality, this peak curve is shifted to the right of that. It's a bit later into the evening than solar power can produce. And so solar panels are great right up until the point where they would be producing too much power as solar power continues to grow, and the curve begins to look like this. What we're going to see is that we are producing way too much power in the evening, or in the midday, and not enough power in the evening. And this drop off, these utility companies are still going to have to deal with. Not only this sharp drop off right here, but what they're also going to have to deal with is these little changes right here. So you can see from this point to this point, that was about 4,800, and that point was about 3,400. So we're looking at a 1,400 megawatt difference from about 4 o'clock to 4 to 5. So in 1 hour, the utility company would have to make up 1,400 megawatts, and that's just based on this chart alone. And so utility companies are struggling because a lot of those baseload plants are not capable of coming up in power that fast. And so that presents a real challenge to the utility companies. And that's why you end up seeing that while utility companies had a lot of incentive in the beginning, they have less incentive now, because we're getting to the point where it's power that can't be utilized quite as effectively as the utility companies need it to be. Now, the solution to this, of course, is going to be long-term. In the long term, is going to be storage technology as batteries get bigger, or if we wanted to use it to produce hydrogen and then burn the hydrogen for power later on in the day. Whatever the different technologies are, we will begin to, as technology grows, we will be able to shift that curve to the right. And at that point, utility companies are going to be at a crossroads, because what's going to end up happening, and we'll back up to this curve here, delete all these stray marks, is as that utility, as the energy usage becomes less and less, let's say it turns into this. Now what we're going to end up seeing is that these baseload plants are not going to be cost effective anymore. And so utility, and that's how the utility companies really make their money, is with these baseload plants. And so this ethics issue is only beginning to unfold, and it's really too early to be able to dig too much into it. But these utility companies are going to have to adapt. They're going to have to turn their profits from these large centralized plants to small supplemental plants, and look more towards the transmission and distribution, getting the power from point A to point B. And that is how these power plants are going to have to adapt. It's now nobody likes change, especially change as drastic as that. So it will truly be interesting to see how the different utility companies try to resist this change or to embrace it. To embrace it would be socially responsible. However, utility companies, it is a free market, and these companies will try to do what they can. So time will tell. Anyways, there are my references. I thank you guys for listening. If you have any other questions, please feel free to message me on the board and we can discuss this further. Again, my name is Gilbert Shupe. Thanks for listening.